Is this thing on? Hello? Hello? Whatever. What is up, guys? It's Alex Johnson here, the founder and lead analyst of yardsperfantasy.com. Welcome into the 112th episode of the Feed Me Fantasy podcast. Let's eat, baby. I've been rebuilding one of my Dynasty teams. I tanked this team trying to win now and making some other mistakes over the last few years before I cracked the code, like we talked about last week, on Dynasty roster management. So this team is still in recovery mode, and I've been following the process that I've used in other leagues to go from rebuild to perennial contender. Anyway, with this particular team, I started the offseason with absolute trash at wide receiver. It was Jerry Jeudy, Kadarius Toney, Jalen Reagor, Bryan Edwards, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Diami Brown, Paris Campbell, Rondale Moore, Amir Smith-Marset, Traquan Smith, Denzel Mims, and some other bottom-of-the-barrel truther types. I mean, that's like the ultimate trash. When you have Jerry Jeudy as your wide receiver one, you know you're in rough shape. And then you take a big drop from Jeudy down to Kadarius Toney, and then even further from that, it was in rough shape. Rough shape. However, after some wheeling and dealing, and because I was patient and I collected all my draft picks like I needed to do, along the way, during the process, during the breakdown, the teardown process, listen to who I roster at the wide receiver position today. It's T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, Elijah Moore, Drake London, Marquise Brown, Jerry Jeudy, Brandon Ayuk, Russell Gage, and Jalen Tolbert. And then literally this happened yesterday. We're just doing our rookie draft this week. I was on the clock at 2:05, okay? Fielding a few offers. One guy offered me Mike Gesicki. I considered, because I could use a tight end. It's a tight end premium league. I was also offered Josh Palmer, who I'd like, but probably not for the 2:05. So I had basically decided I was going to just sit on the pick and take Isaiah Spiller. I was happy with it. I decided I'd wait a few more minutes to see if any more offers came in, and then I'd press the button on Isaiah Spiller and I'd move on. Then I get an offer. The guy was offering me Elijah Moore straight up for the 2:05. What? I was so thrown off and caught off guard by this offer. I couldn't even think straight. My mind went into like a fog. It was crazy. It was weird. I couldn't even comprehend who Elijah Moore was. Like, this is Elijah Moore, right? Like the Elijah Moore from the Jets, the stud rookie from last season. I literally looked him up to make sure I wasn't losing my mind or that he didn't get hurt or freaking die or something. But nope, this is Elijah Moore that is being offered to me straight up for the 2:05. What? I pressed the accept button so fast. Holy shit. You better believe I did a little dance after that one. You better believe it. Elijah Moore for 2:05. Wow. Anyway, we're back to Dynasty rebuild strategy. We talked about last week. We had part one, kind of went through the teardown process, what we want to do throughout the rebuild. Today, we're going to, still talk rebuild, but we're going to do a little twist, kind of go the next steps with it. We're going to talk about how I build these teams so I no longer have to rebuild ever again. That's the ultimate goal. We talked about that last week. The ultimate goal is to never have to rebuild again, to be a perennial championship contender. That's what we want. That's what we want to do. And you have to do it the right way. You have to be patient and you have to practice some of these things we're going to talk about today. So the first thing I like to keep in mind, once we've rebuilt the team, once we have that dominant contender that we tried to build up, the mindset is I'm always reloading, never rebuilding. So, like I said, we built the team the right way. We want to avoid ever having to rebuild again. We want to avoid the never-ending cycle of contending, tearing it down, and building it back up. Continually going through that process is tiring. It really is. Never mind that we're wasting precious years basically sitting out and watching someone else take home the hardware. Like, what fun is that? And you're wasting money. But some of these leagues, they have big entry fees. You got to pay that every year. You're wasting it. Why? And plus, many teams that descend into that rebuild mode, they never make it out the other side. So instead, we want to sustain long-term success and be a contending team every single year. This takes some work, so I hope you're ready. However, with that said, before we get into that, I do want to just remind you, in Dynasty, I think there's a big mistake that a lot of people make. You're allowed to win now, guys. You are allowed to win now. It's okay. Some managers find themselves in a perpetual loop of chasing youth. While that's great in the early stages of a rebuild, sometimes the end game, winning titles, it gets lost. Chasing youth and potential to the extreme ends up driving your team into the ground. That's because while potential sometimes comes to fruition, players often fail to reach the levels that we think they can get to, with many not even getting close. Fantasy points win championships, not potential. Going too far the other way, however, will inevitably wind up bringing you back to rebuild mode. There's a way to add production to your crop of young talent and do it the right way without sacrificing long-term sustained success. So veteran players can often be had at a discounted rate in the offseason, especially during draft season, when all of your league mates are experiencing peak rookie fever. Once you're in contender mode, your roster will ideally consist of a handful of low-cost, productive, and veteran wide receivers and tight ends, usually ages 28 to 31. It's going to have a strong core of young, in their prime, peak production wide receivers and tight ends as well. A stable of 2 to 3 high-end young running backs, ages 21 to 24. 2+ handcuff running backs. They don't have to be handcuffs to your own running backs. 5 young running backs, wide receivers, tight ends with that potential, because we all like to have some of those guys at least, right? And in super flex leagues, you want one young Konami code quarterback with upside, a steady, safe veteran. Then you also want 1 or 2 other quarterbacks you can turn to on bye weeks or as injury replacements, and then 1 or 2 upside backups. So when we're handling our veterans, like in the offseason and so forth, my mindset is you're better to be a year early than a year late on moving off a guy. While it's important to have some veterans on your team to help you compete in the short term, you must be wary of allowing your squad to become an old team. The key to this is knowing when to move on from veteran players at the right time. And more importantly, it's getting out before the bottom falls out and their value plummets. My philosophy here, like I said, is it's better to move on a year too early than a year too late. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of old farts sitting on your team, taking up precious roster spots. So how do we know when the right time to get out is? We can start by understanding the age apex for each position. So at running backs, they typically perform at their ceiling between ages 22 to 24. Once they hit age 25, the cliff comes fast. The off season between a running back's age 24, age 25 seasons, that's probably, in most cases, that's the best time to cash out. This is why we want running backs in our rookie drafts. Get those early years and move on. But we'll get to that in a few minutes. Wide receivers, they usually find their prime production years between ages 24 and 27. Selling after age 27 is optimal. But like I said, you're still going to have a few guys who are 28, 29, 30 because you can have them at value. But if you're looking to maximize a player's value on the out, you'll trade them, age 27. Tight ends take longer to break out than other positions in most cases. It can be a long ramp up to peak production. Some even waiting until their second contract or even their second team. See like Greg Olsen, for example, before hitting their ceiling. We usually get the most out of them between ages 25, 28. After that, it's time to move on. While there's nothing wrong with hanging on to a guy beyond their age apex season, like I just said, I would recommend that really being the exception, not the rule. In most cases, it's recommended you move on, collect your money bag, pick some players, and keep the fire burning with the next generation of young players. So I mentioned a few minutes ago, we want to acquire our running backs through the rookie draft. Elite running backs are incredibly valuable in fantasy football. We all know that, whether it's redraft, dynasty, whatever. You can have a great wide receiving core, an elite tight end, a top end quarterback, but without that bell cow back giving you those 20-point weeks, you're not taking home any titles. Unfortunately, the shelf life of these running backs is so short, as we talked about just a minute ago, and we also talked about on the last episode. We really need to get these running backs as early in their careers as possible so we can squeeze as much juice out of their prime years as we can. This is why I recommend spending your rookie picks trying to capture these guys when they're coming into the league. Running backs with early round draft capital typically return fantasy value in their rookie seasons. They get immediate opportunity, and all of the other fantasy positions, they have the easiest transition from college to the NFL. Running backs have the easiest transition compared to wide receivers, especially quarterbacks. And we just mentioned tight ends. They can sometimes take years to break out. Running backs, they're often productive right away. I mean, we've seen it more often lately with wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, these guys breaking out as rookies. But if you compare the two positions year over year, you're more likely to see these running backs have immediate success versus these wide receivers. And at the same time, these running backs, they only have that short window to perform at a peak level. A running back with early draft capital, an all-purpose skill set, and who's entering the league at age 21 is incredibly valuable. That's like freaking dynasty gold, man. That's why guys like Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall were so highly sought after at the 101 of rookie drafts in their respective draft classes. Being 21 rather than 23 gives their dynasty managers an extra 2-year window to enjoy dominant production. So once your rebuild is complete and you're competing for championships, it's easy to get caught up in the moment and forget the long-term goal. While it's okay to lean win now, as discussed earlier, we really want to strike the perfect balance between short-term and long-term success. That's why it's incredibly important to continue to replenish the youth on your roster. Chasing the young guns isn't just for rebuilding teams. One of the mistakes I made early in my dynasty career was seeing my win now window and becoming aggressively nearsighted. I will continue to reiterate that recognizing your championship window and trying to take advantage is perfectly okay. But there are lethal mistakes to avoid. One of them that I repeatedly made over a 3-year stretch on a team that was having a good run and competing for titles during that time was trading away all of my first round picks. Actually, it wasn't even giving up the picks that did me in. It was trading them for the wrong guys. What I mean is I dealt first round picks for aging wide receivers who I knew I could never recoup the value from. I traded for late Bengals career AJ Green. He was having a great season. I thought he'd be the last piece I needed to get over the hump. Instead, he suffered an injury the very next week, and he never cracked my lineup again. I traded some other pieces. I don't remember what it was. It was back in like 2018, 2019. The dude made my lineup 1 week, broke his fucking foot or something, and he never got in my lineup ever again. And then I dealt him for peanuts a year after, because his dynasty value just cratered. It just cratered. And I did the same with Alshon Jeffrey and repeated the same mistake one more time with T.Y. Hilton, all with similar results. So the lesson I took away was that, sure, it's fine to trade away first to pursue a title. That's okay. I don't always recommend it, but it's okay. But it's okay only when that player that you're receiving is at an age where that value can be returned, whether that be in a future deal or by providing your team with prime production from multiple seasons. I ended up with a team that went from perennial contender to an old, worthless bunch of bottom feeders in friggin' the blink of an eye. I had no youth to continue the cycle and was sucked into a multi-year rebuild. As noted earlier, it is essential to keep replenishing the youth of your roster, even in the midst of a championship run. I now dedicate at least 3 to 5 spots on every one of my rosters to developmental players. Let me try that again. Developmental players. I don't know how that came out weird. This helps with the bottom of the roster churn and to continue to feed the machine. So, rookie drafts. We talked about earlier, I'm in a rookie draft right now. I think we're wrapping up the 3rd, 4th round. I just took Keontae Ingram in the 3rd round and Isaiah Pacheco in the 3rd round. And one of the things I always try to do, I go into every single draft with the same goal in mind, and that's to walk out with at least one additional pick in the next year's draft. This is just another way of ensuring the youth continues to be replenished. I don't care if it's another first. I don't care if it's a friggin' measly 4th rounder. As long as I have something extra I can carry over into next season, I'm happy. I just want to add extra picks. I think this rookie draft I just went into, I had 11 picks going into it. I'm only going to end up taking 5 guys because of all the trading, during the draft. I acquired Michael Pittman. I gave up the 106 for Michael Pittman. I gave up, like we talked about at the top of the show, I gave up the 205 for Elijah Moore. What? That blew my mind still. So I'm only going to take 5 guys in this draft. However, I went in with 11 picks, and that gave me so much flexibility during the draft. And I think I had 4 picks in next year's draft coming into this year's draft. I now hold 7. So I've added multiple picks in next year's draft. And I try to do that every single year. I typically, obviously this is done by trading back, but it can also be done by trading away players. So I'm always trying to just find ways. It allows you to be flexible on the draft board, allows you to do all kinds of things. And look, I get the 205 for Elijah Moore. It sets you up for these mind-blowing. I got Elijah Moore for the 205. I'm not the one who traded away Elijah Moore. I got Elijah Moore. Hell yeah, I got Elijah Moore. But anyway, it gives you flexibility and it gives you those opportunities to sit on the clock and somebody throws out an Elijah Moore for the 205. Mind-blowing deals. But anyway, here's a fact. Here's a fact, and then we'll get out of here. You're not as good at player evaluations as you think you are. I know we all think we're the best at knowing which rookies are going to be studs. However, even the best talent evaluators, they bat below 500. We have to accept that and account for it in all the moves that we make. An example of this is in 2021, when everyone was sure that Kadarius Toney was destined to be an ultimate bust. However, he was falling way too low in rookie drafts for a real-life first-rounder. And sure, the jury is still out on how good or bad he truly is. There was a point where we had to accept that we don't know everything. And there is absolutely a chance he winds up being a hit. After all, the NFL told us they think he's good by drafting him in the first round, even if it was Dave Gettleman making the call. This goes beyond rookie drafts too. It's important we continue to recalibrate our player evaluations based on new information. That information could be a player's performance on the field. It could be a news item. It could be a transaction. Whatever it is, we have to absorb all of the information available to us in order to avoid take lock. Otherwise, opportunities will be missed to acquire a breakout star or to offload a screaming bust. That's all I got for you guys today. I appreciate you tuning in on Twitter, on YouTube, on TikTok. I love you all. Thank you so much. Check out yardsperfantasy.com. I just dropped my redraft rankings this past week for the 2022 season. Those will be updated all the way through the kickoff of the season. We got Dynasty rankings. We got all kinds of strategy articles. These strategies I just talked about for rebuild last week and this week coming out in articles. One of them, part 1, dropped last week. Part 2 is probably going to drop this week. I'm excited. We got all kinds of good stuff happening at yardsperfantasy.com. And hey, if you make projections, go to yardsperfantasy.com/projections. Download our projections template. It is, I promise you, is the best projections template you've ever used. It's ready to go. So many features, so many things you can do with it. You can turn it into a weekly projections tool during the season. You can export your rankings. You can customize fantasy football settings. It's just incredible. You're going to dominate your drafts because you are going to make your own projections. I promise it makes you a better fantasy football player. Check it out. Do it. I promise you're going to love it. And because you're a loyal listener of the Feed Me Fantasy podcast, use promo code FEEDME to get $2.99 taken right off and get it for last year's price of just $5. And let me tell you, it is worth way more. Check that out. Everything we're doing at Yards Per Fantasy. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Sayonara.